if the goal of the pro-life movement were not to make abortion illegal, but to simply persuade the majority of Americans, specifically, and in particular American women, that it is just something they should never do, would it be more successful? I mean, my concern is that the threat of criminalizing people actually immediately stops people listening.
It does, but that's why the pro-life, if you listen to, I mean, first of all, if you listen to Republican politicians, you will never hear a Republican politician say he wants to criminalize abortion in general. And if you listen to the most effective pro-life activists, and if you listen to the Catholic bishops and so on, I mean, I think the successes of the pro-life movement in moving public opinion on the issue have been driven by, yes, exactly, not using the rhetoric of criminalization, but speaking, a sort of rhetoric
science.
Of moral persuasion and so on.
Nothing's been more powerful than our ability to image the little embryo, which we didn't have before.
But again, it's tricky, right? Because you can't just say, well, all debates, a debate this important is only a debate about culture and not a debate about law, right? Because culture and law interact and shape each other in all kinds of ways.
To change the culture and then the law will follow.
Right, but I mean, again, if you take
So I come from a perspective.
But it's easy. It's easy for you to say because you've come so far in 15 years, right? But
it worked for one. It works for a lot of things. If you're telling the truth, and if you're clearly, that's all your agenda is, rather than seeking power. And I think people can sniff out.
But think about
the distinction.
But think about the way it felt to you when Republicans, conservatives were trying to enshrine the traditional definition of marriage in state constitutions, and then we're trying to put it in the U.S. Constitution, right? For pro-lifers, that already happened. Essentially, a group of justices ruled that pro-life conviction is, I don't want to say un-American, that's too strong a word, but that the pro-life argument is contrary to the Constitution of the United States. And that, I think, is the existence of that ruling and its consequences, both for law and culture, is what makes it's such a huge hurdle on the one hand for the pro-life movement to get over, and on the other hand, it keeps that debate political. I mean, I think for you, imagine if Republicans had succeeded in passing a constitutional amendment, sort of whatever the language was, but let's say I think it would have intended to radicalize you politically a bit more than what actually happened, which has been a sort of succession of victories for your side of the argument has done. So that's all I mean by saying, there's a real overlap between our positions on sort of this critique of how partisanship can corrupt Christianity. But it's just, I think you should have maybe a little more sympathy for how sort of Christian conservatives have wrestled with these issues, just because they're so hard.
It is very hard. And one can't take an absolutist position on either position, I think, perfectly. But then it becomes a question of what do you think you want to emphasize and nudge towards. One of the things I liked about this book a lot was its pushing away of the political and its concentration again on religion as itself. Right. So you're not going to, although I do think there's a difference, by the way, just parenthetically, because a constitutional amendment on that would have, I think, singled out a group of people within the society and had a specific part of the Constitution designed to affect them alone, whereas, and it really does affect them, not in terms of someone who doesn't want to have an abortion.
You don't think that Roe versus Wade singles out a group of, let's say, members of the species Homo sapiens and subjects them to a particular form of political treatment? That little guy in the ultrasound that you were talking about. I mean, Roe versus Wade states it writes Peter Singer's philosophy into constitutional law.
Those fetuses would not be, or embryos would, or early children in the womb would not feel anything from this. I mean, yes, they would objectively be marginalized, but they wouldn't be. You wouldn't be telling a whole bunch of active American citizens.
They would just be killed. Yeah, you wouldn't. They aren't voters, if that's what you mean. They aren't.
But I'm not going to disagree with that Roe versus Wade. I think it was a horrible decision. I think it ruined a lot of our politics in a lot of areas subsequently, and has been a bane of the culture wars. And insofar as it tempted evangelicals to come flooding into political life, I think it was the worst decision ever made by the Supreme Court.